Enter that's better. So you take those three, then you go back here. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone, for the impromptu break. I guess back then we're just going to give a little bit of a roadmap of where things are going forward development. So first, the thing I'm going to talk about is just a little bit of our next steps on our update and release schedule will be, what the instructions are for those who have installed their own version of the system. If they do version, what to do, how should you migrate data from the old one to the new one? Should you do this? What's that? Similarly, I'm going to talk about the current issues that we've discovered, and as well as our future plans to do some further implementation of other data that's inside of the ISO standard and expanded around that. I would say is that the update release schedule, we haven't any particular area, but what we've been doing lately is about once every week we do a test of the FDA does, we've seen, along with some other data coming in. We feedback from a small group to find out where things are going and where things are. In the meantime, for the actual software, we've been making continuous internal releases and attempting to test things about once every other week. Future, I imagine in the near future, we'll be able to post these things probably on a bi-monthly basis for the coming future. For the quick bug fixes and so on, these are the messages, but we haven't discussed the exact release we'll do for that. But you can keep you can investigate at the link we've provided to see the data downloads, and if you see it come up, you can give it a shot. And if to be kept up to whenever there is a new release, just let us know, and then we'll do some mailing list and notify you as we release. Right now, I would say that for upgrade instructions, it's in this somewhat early evaluation stage. We will not, as of this point, make any complete migration instructions available. So we may end up having some tool migrate data that you put in initially immediately into that. But I say for right now, anything you put into this version of the system, don't count on it persisting. You want to upgrade to the new one. But eventually we will have a good built-in mechanism for this. But for right now, they just evaluate this, then destroy that, and here's the version, evaluate this, destroy that, and so on. In the future, of course, to have a more robust in-place upgrade with deep validation as certain rules come forward and so on. If there's a mechanism that somebody would like for this, we're very open to discussing about how is that we could change some processes, whether there's some way that you would recommend things work. I know we have very smart people in the room who have, good about how they like to have these things work. So, questions?
When you say upgrade, are you talking just about the software or also changes?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. I've conflated the two here. There's both of them. So upgrading the software is one thing, which right now are saying that when we anticipate that the data that you're associating with this will be preserved, and that's because we like to package the two together for now. We like to package the software and the database together as a default. In the future, we'll have procedures for both the new software and the new additional changes, the deltas of those records coming forward. No. So I'd also like to just take this opportunity to thank everybody here for coming and for bearing with us and for helping us evaluate and go forward with this. It's been tremendous help, and we really appreciate the tremendous response we've received. Very good.
Thank you. All the work.
You want to discuss the next meeting we might have? What's our name? Are we going to discuss the name?
Well, that's probably a good idea. Actually, let me just get through just a really quick edition of this. So I was actually going to go. So now that you've all thanked me for this, now I'm going to tell you. Yeah, a little trick I do. No, actually, it was kind of funny last night. I went home and I saw this. We have this issue list that we're keeping track of certain bugs. And I went home last night and I was so excited to see that people have really taken a deep interest into this. And so many comments that we've gotten so far saying like, I like the way this is displayed. I think this one should be over here. I think this should be there. And many of these are bugs and features that we never would have even thought of. And it was so wonderful to see a community gather around and say, this is the things that things could be improved. And it was I think, it was tremendously, humbling to see all of that happen. One of the things we'd like to be able to do in the current system, we can register a specified substance group 1. We cannot do 2 and above, and that's something that will need to be done in the future. There's some discussion that we'd like to have about the proper ways that some of this information should be captured. Standard, of course, is somewhat vague at this point, and the implementation guides have not yet broached this subject. So, we'd like to work together with all parties involved to make sure that the way this is consistent with the way that everybody would expect it to be done.
It's also depending on organization form.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things to do. But you could start when you start with by typing in. Let's see, make it with typing in the organization or at least the website.
No, and in the standard, though, you debate whether we would just capture the manufacturer or the manufacturer and manufacturing site for group. And I would agree with you that capture the manufacturer.
And I would like to link with for future, and I was speaking also with the industry, that we have a felt where we can say, okay, inspection was made, GMP inspection was made at date, and validated either IEMA or our country or GINAS or FDA.
Yep.
Because we have a trouble with a product, it's mostly that is a starting material or something else, and we must have for future a search that we can say, okay, this is trouble in that kind of site, specific American site, in which product is that single.
That's right.
And that's yes or no.
Yeah. No, that's important, but whether that's information we can make public or not, I'm not sure all the time.
No, it's not public.
I know 43
but we
letters
need
public,
that, we need that information.
Yeah,
so
no.
fields have to be.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of effort. It's outside our realm about coordinating inspections.
Yeah.
And things like that. It's very
At
important.
least we should have the finality.
Part of the of the agency agreements. That's what they agree.
Yeah.
But important. And then drugs on the market are being on the market, really record that. And so that the whole world knows about it sometimes, because that's
And we have a confidentially blacklist.
Yeah. No, I know you. Yeah. We have banned persons.
A particular item is actually finding a good way to capture and model some of the PK and metabolism data that you might have. So right now we have lots of this model, just a simple relationship. It's in the initial data and so on, but really more to it than just the simple relationships. There's a lot of auxiliary fields and information that's somewhat well modeled at this moment, but it's incomplete. And really what we need is sort of an overview view of what a metabolism looks like or what some key information looks like. We need a good way to model.
We need for that preclinical experts also.
That's right. That's true.
And the same is for starting materials.
Yeah.
We can discuss more and the structure, but also like to give put in information as its procedure. It was agreed, yes or no.
Yeah.
It's very confidential information, but that is essential for us. So then you make your substance database available very for the regulatory system.
Yeah.
And it does. Yes, actually, it's back because the prices can be reduced for industry.
That's right. So I think it's a fascinating data modeling question as well.
Yes.
How do you capture things that is as complex as the process to get into this? It's
I'm still busy already with
perfect now.
The data model itself, so
Yeah.
quite way into that. I would say there's configuration information here, and the end goal is to be a centralized database. Are there any plans to put anything together to allow people to put maybe a standalone system together that they can, where the database itself is hosted locally and they can, sandbox without having to worry about things being changed or moved
So I believe that's what we've already distributed.
Basically, you can keep that. There's no restrictions on the use of it that we know of. Is there a mechanism for creating? Maybe I missed this. Is there a mechanism for creating a database, say in Oracle or something?
Yeah. So we probably haven't discussed this in the strongest detail. We probably have gone over this a little bit more. I think we may have done is handed out very eagerly handed out and gave installation instructions to people without telling them what they were installing. If that's the case, then I apologize. Yeah. Because that's not good. Thank you for installing it, but now to tell you what you installed. It's a virus. And every morning. That's right.
No, but we will have a system that you can download with data and things like that. They're already one,
So right now, that's what you're installing is a data system that's it's a standalone. It's using, by default, this embedded H2 database. That's where the information is going from. You have your own version of the API. You have your own version of the software. You could be disconnected from the internet. It would still house all your data locally behind your firewall, wherever it is you'd want to do. You run locally, use that to search and test out things. And that doesn't, you could just ignore all of our updates if you'd like, and then just keep that version forever.
So that is in the Word file?
Those Word files together are doing that, yeah.
Okay, so I'll go back and the data, we haven't given you a way to upload the data if you local install, but we will in the near future.
So that's what I meant by the migration tool.
Yeah.
These migration tools, this is the data migration tools here. Those are just general tools to hit the API in order to register information into local install. So
the render word, the database.
Those are just a service that's just useful for rendering some chemical structures and things like that. It's the AI that's actually housed together with an embedded database.
Okay.
Yeah. In the future, the APIs now, some of the back-end plug the API is changing around, and the deeper, more rich kind of SQL accessible things will be made available so that you can query that in attached memory.
So every question.
People the GINAS on one and the API on another have that.
That's exactly.
So the database isn't well fielded now. It will be well fielded in the next version. Yeah. Right.
Now, any one of those three things, or three war files, any one of them can be on any different instance. They just have to be able to talk to each other. And in the initial installation instructions that we set out, they'll just say how it is you establish that connection in order to talk to.
Perfect.
Questions?
Yeah. When somebody is altering the tables to finds that he please fight with his alterations and communicate with the fields. Maybe because he can other fields than we recognize.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I think Herman's response was if somebody has changed the data and they are satisfied with the changes they've made to the data, they communicate those changes back to somebody who wants to see them. Is that correct?
Yeah, or us.
Yeah. So the mechanism I would say, if you're doing this on the front end, the import button on any record that you're seeing, if you add that file to us, this is just a one-off for one-off ones, but for ones, if they set the file to us, we can import it, accept the changes, and save them into our local installation. So
no, probably I don't understand it, but the message and age, we define them, and you can change it. Otherwise, translations will say from getting to 11.
yeah.
That fixed. That is. Yeah. Want to get to import data which point to different fields in our own system, or have declared that is right.
Okay, at least it's the way we represent this one, respecting the NCATS standard, formally we have to respect that. So the other system, when you receive your method, the same way out must be compatible.
Yeah.
So there are ones who have some discussion.
So look at HL7 import and export. I didn't mean to implicate that we wouldn't. It's just that we want the, we're gonna the HL7 message will get,
We can talk polite.
we can have that. Maybe.
For the next,
Yeah.
we can take offline.
Yeah.
But
Again, there may be multiple ways to import data. I mean, most chemical databases.
My question is if somebody else or has a local installation and makes changes for themselves for the tables and for the fields, then they don't connect with
if they add tables to it, that's probably fine, Herman.
Yeah.
If they change the names of the fields in the tables, that may cause a problem. So if you want to connect other tables to this information, you'll be able to do that.
And therefore I should say, make a complete fixed definition when you go in, out, and export, because then you have to comply to the fields and exactly what is there.
For the substance information, you should keep that locked. Now we have product information that's going to connect into our tables. We have application information that's going to connect into our tables. They may not be in a public distribution, but
so let me try to summarize what I believe the discussion is saying here, which is what Herman is saying is that if we have populated cells of data in the distributable database, and in it has a definition of, say, a antibody, a long list of names. Someone says, oh, I believe that I will add this name and subtract this name, and I will add this data, subtract this data, and I will choose the sequence to have, favorite names of my, bands inside of the sequence and so on. Then if they wanted to send us that data and have us apply it, we shouldn't let them apply arbitrary changes. So if that's true, that we wouldn't open to do that.
No, we have to make a session lock when it's not compatible at the same place. What we are doing, it will be rejected.
So let's say that right now it will be a manual process. If someone sent you a message, your protected version is behind your firewall. You can do what we want with it. If they send you a message that has different information, you can look at it side by side and decide whether you want to accept their changes or not. And if you want to, you could. I say that really those changes that are definitional changes should be spelled out differently than those changes that are just informational. Someone adding a name is not that big deal. Someone changing the sequence of a protein sequence, that is a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
So as of right now, those fields are implicitly defined based on the alternative structures. but to have like a tool to compare those two and say, does this change trigger should change essentially trigger changing of an approval ID of a, that's what we would be sure was like.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right.
I related to the question of Arman.
Yeah.
Kind of, I understand that when you do a change, nothing is approved immediately.
Yes.
No?
So this is sort of true. If you do change that's something that's not already approved, it's not approved immediately. So this is sort of an accident of history that may be addressed. Is the addition of a name for a substance is always allowed.
Okay.
But the initial approval of the definition of a substance needs to happen before a identifier is generated. So let me step through that. Use substance, it doesn't get a unique identifier, it doesn't get an approved identifier. You have to convince another person that what you have makes sense and that it is a real defined thing. They use it, it goes forward. Then you can add things to this information and still be all right. What should happen is that certain are allowed to make additions of names. Certain are highly discouraged from happening. It is impossible to say that certain changes can never happen because at certain times even definitional information gets more right or gets more rich. Sometimes there's just a better format for what it is. Sometimes, for instance, people will just like the way that this tautomer looks compared to this other tautomer or something like that. So that review process, though, right, does not require approval. It does require some administrative rights to be able to do that. But it could be in the future that someone making any change to an approved substance that you need to get that change approved as well. We just want to make it too hard for people to add little bits of information.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would see the whole import things, you should have something similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Whether, and we talked about this, like if you're, say, I approve something, we're importing it out, we may want to keep that data confidential, so that, so when we're transferring data, we probably, between systems, we probably won't actually put the person that entered it, the person that imported it, which we capture. We would just export, the approved substance with the name. In the internal system, we have that, and that's probably what you know who all your users are and things like that. But
I think my point is when it comes in,
it came from your system.
it goes into a holding pattern. Someone has to review it.
Right, that's right. Now, we don't have to enter it, so then that would just be a one-step process. And usually what happens is senior, or, usually, not everybody can approve something, just any other person, and some of us are easier to convince than others. So I mean, if we got something entered, we would just review it, and then we'd see it with the application maybe, or just with the CAS number, or it doesn't make sense, or something, and then one it was the same people who can approve stuff would approve in our system and give an ID. Other, the other agencies do, or other systems do. They may want to review what we give them to it, they may want to just take it in, and then if you see an error, communicate with us.
So I'd also just like to piggyback on that for a second to say that I received a lot of questions that seem to be some confusion. I think we haven't been terribly around on several fronts, more than just the software installation. One of the other places that we haven't been clear about is the real distinction between some local installation and the procedures that they do, and the FDA's procedure they follow.
Yeah.
And those don't have to be the same procedure. This is software. Someone wants to use the software and wants to change their own business.
But you locked in. It has to be a different person who entered it and approves it. So you can't,
There are certain business processes that are by default locked in the way that the FDA would do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you have to follow them exactly. The software is free to use as one would want.
Yeah.
So, I had some questions saying, they were like, okay, so I bring this into my firewall, and I end up, and then someone from the FDA has to come in and approve it.
No, well, you
invite the FDA over, then
Well, but if you really identify.
if you want your own unique identifier,
yeah, you can do
you just
that.
have to convince somebody in your company to approve it. If someone has that role.
But your system generates really two identifiers, one on entry, and they can expose that identifier if they want it.
Sure, no, that's true.
Yeah, and then there's another identifier if you want to have a review or just want to have a checkbox that somebody's reviewed it. But that's up to your business process, basically.
Yeah.
You know, if the FDA were kind of surprised, it's only 2 levels of review.
Yeah, so it's going to be a lot more, right?
But that's what we've done.
You have to go to,
Yeah. But,
so I hope that clears up some questions, but,
right.
or maybe it just makes it prettier mud.
But you want to have a button to create an identifier dependent on approval. Yeah.
So is the identifier the uni field, right? The uni, what would you say, uni identifier of the data?
Yeah. So actually, this is an important point that I sort of skirted around, which is V7 of the API. You'll find that the default approval ID is called uni. From then on, it's called approval ID. So if you see the difference between that,
No, it's V8.
V8
It's V8, yes.
it might have been important as well.
Because of HTTPS.
Yeah.
V8.
It must be someone who must have put the old data into V8, so that's the problem. But in theory, it will be approval ID instead of uni.
The ID from GINAS, and the supplement there is uni. It's because it's not published with FDA.
Okay, the ISO identifier.
Yeah. So the question of what an ISO identifier is beyond the scope of what the software specifically deals with, but the point of it is to say that someone can decide whether this information, substance information, is sufficient for a qualification for an ISO identifier. And theoretically, if you convince somebody else to approve it and so on in the system, the identifier made there, if it was done in best practices, would meet the requirements for an ISO identifier. So I think you brought up that you might want to do something, have a discussion about the name or about something.
Well, the name of the software, I think, is everybody okay? What do we agree on? Global Substance Information System, GINAS?
Yeah, GINAS.
Yeah.
And the number of pronunciations, the other one is not,
Yeah. Is that Globsys was already taken for English. It sounds like.
The next best thing is
Then when some other implementation comes along, they'll say, we're better than Jesus.
Larry says when he uses a system.
A lot of 4-letter words. No, okay.
Then, by the way, I mentioned that was the funniest part of trying to make good, unique identifier things is having to come up with certain words that can't come up next to each other. Those lists and having to embed them hard code them into code is always the funniest part of programming.
I guess we don't allow in Unicode. We don't 3-letter words. We allow 3 but not 4-letter words. We allow.
okay, for the time being.
And the S is the end. How do you want? Should we discuss?
So we're into the discussion section. So we've dedicated theoretically 2 hours for general discussion. I think that we don't need to take up the 2 hours for those who are just.
Well, the other thing to mention is this is really a community development project until we'll make it available to kids level. If people want to look at contributory code, you know, if somebody wants to write a GIN to HL7 parser, you know, that would be great, you know, again, and there's a way to do that. Right now, you know, we're reaching the stage where we could almost accept, you know, additions to code and things like that.
So as of right now, we have a local Git repository. We're not on GitHub, for instance. But I would like to commit, give us your information, many have, to a GitLab contributor, and we'd like to just actually make some changes and say, oh gosh, this Tyler guy, I can't believe you did this thing. And then take it around. Absolutely, you can commit it, put it on a branch, and we'll take a look, and likely we'll
even especially the aesthetic stuff. I mean, we are gonna redo a lot of stuff, and you know, actually the business flow that Taylor showed here will probably stay pretty much it, but the aesthetics of it may change. There may be
you don't like gray and black, Larry. I don't know.
But you know, but again, you know, things will change. Yeah.
HL7.
Yeah.
And you have Jason and HL7.
Yeah. So if we didn't send that back to you, I'll just have Trung make sure that we add you to the Yeah. Sure.
I sent you an email already.
Okay, great. So I just have to communicate this with Trung, and then we'll get this through there. So you should have by the end of the day, but if not, with me.
And if data sets you think are relevant that we could use that are, again, we're not looking for like screening data or stuff like that, but stuff that is really relevant. It could be screening data if it's tox data or things like that. We're always interested in getting to make it public and, you know, links between, you know, what are all the transporter enzymes that things inhibit. I mean, we're starting to add that from horses and cytochromes and things like that. And, you know, if you have suggestions for what other we should add, because again, like Tyler said, this is hopefully a tool that will help drug development and getting more data in will help that. If you have ideas for what we should add to the system, you know.
And also ways that we can manage
Spectroscopy, we want to add, you know, animal data that, you know, so that our review chemists are always, you know, well, you got a similar compound in there, we get a new compound, can look at the spectra of the similar compound and see makes sense, and, you know, because they really verify the structures. I mean, we just multi-time enter from the name and the picture. We don't go into our spectra or their crystal structure to look and see if there's a system.
Well, the reason we don't do it, we assume that the CETA reviewer did that.
Yeah. And so, yeah. You know, again, I mean, this is a community project. We hope. Yeah. And the next meeting, we're going to have hopefully a major release in the summer. And we are meeting in the summer. I know you enjoyed the weather here in Washington, but you know, at this time of year it's certainly beautiful. But you know, we'll have a meeting. We were thinking, you know, we were supposed to go back and forth between Europe and the U.S. and eventually Asia somewhere. So the next meeting we're perhaps having it in Sweden. I mean, with our friends from UMC may be able to host it. Is there anybody against Sweden?
I don't think if someone poses a question in a way.
But we would perhaps have a meeting in Sweden in the summer. You know, I don't get funding to go, but we'll try to go anyway.
So if you want to go to Sweden, you should come in the summer. That's
right. Yeah.
If it's in the summer, we might accept it.
Put you through enough things, bring you to DC. So we'd have it in the summer. Is there any days that, you know, either probably July or August later would do better, because again, we want to make sure we have this numbers ready.
August is usually bad for your.
But people are on vacation, you know.
No.
Vacation.
This is fine.
Yeah.
You'll be retired by then.
So is that? We're not setting the absolute date now, but you know, if there's dates you absolutely can't make and you absolutely want to.
No, but in Europe, a lot of people go holidays on June and on except EMA's closed in August.
Germany is quite often.
International gets closed, but we don't still do it then in summer. To meet August can be done again in your
Yeah,
You're never gonna pick a time whenever
everybody's available, so we'll maybe, what, you wanna, we'll try what, the first week in August, would that be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Some first week in August.
The light is very nice.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, first week in August then, and, you know, if you wanna block that off in your calendars, if you wanna try to get, this week, and again, you know, you can only get with Tyler, with Noel, with Frank Rye, if you have questions or about anything, we'll try to get them answered, if we can't answer them. First week in August in Upsala, and, you know, again, governance, we were talking about governance too, I know it's been a topic on a lot of people's mind, and eventually, you know, I don't know, if Thomas Balzer on the phone still, or I don't know if Thomas is on the phone. I believe Paul is German. But you know, the governance model, we want to have a, you know, there's options. We either sort of do this to, you know, I mean, NCATS is going to keep developing it for 2 or 3, maybe for longer, but again, there should be some organization sponsoring this activity, things like that, and, you know, so suggestions, I mean, what would be a good organization, or things like that. I mean, you can't have a pharmaceutical company sponsor it, but, you know, but a nonprofit, or, you know, or something like that, it could, and, you know, make it available for free, would be things that we would have to start another corporation or another nonprofit, which is difficult to do times. So, that we're thinking of. There's a couple that come to mind. I mean, UMC, CDIS, you know, other, you know, organizations that campaign. I mean, we're not part of ICH, I don't know if it's Japanese, or, you know, but who will meet this? And we're not. But you know, but that's, you know, that's would be part of the discussion. Yeah. But that would be part of the discussion. I don't know, you know, certainly the regulatory agencies would hopefully stay involved and be partners in it, but we have to come up with some sort of governance model and things like that. They have any input. I mean, ICH was, you know, it was only limited to 3 countries and a couple other observers, but, you know, we're not there now, so we have to come up with some way of doing it. And whether it's rather the IMPRIT or WHO, that might be useful. To get this to a lot of countries, I mean, you know, Europe and the U.S. and Japan have regulatory systems, but we think this can be a real tool to help, you know, register drugs throughout the world. I know U.S. people want to work in Africa, and some of their registration systems are like this, a piece of paper with, you know, and they literally, I mean, you know, and you know,
I also mentioned that in the future, so we've been working on the process of systematically coming up with a list of all the terms that need localization. And with the expertise in this room, I think this would actually not be terribly tricky. This is mostly just for interface things and messaging, just basic kind of visual message things, what buttons say and what, you know, validation messages would say and so on. And at some point it would be wonderful for those who would like to contribute and speak more than the language that I speak, accounting and programming languages. That would be very helpful.
I think that's great, Tyler. If you want to show your sheet where you keep the controlled vocabulary,
so I think
and then we can make that available, and the idea would be for another language, you know, keep the really key pair, but then we have your, whatever you think is the best translation for that. So right now you can capture names in other languages, but you can't capture the elements or the things on the screen in other languages. But that's what, if you really want to be used in many countries, you have to have language there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Don't need to do everything. No, you don't need to have only a few fields have to be in
And our best, okay.
I would say it 100% necessary for implementation of things in the software to do that. I think it's one of those nice features that would be helpful for people to understand, especially if one of the nice things about this is that for countries where they might not be able to afford a lot of infrastructure in order to do this, that this would be a tool they could start with, and it'd be if it was able to just support whatever native language is used there.
But certainly things like which are spoken in Spanish and things like that can chart, because German, they all speak English, right? Probably better than many foreigners who speak English. So that, that would be very helpful, and perhaps somebody wants to volunteer, which is available to them. So,
You can do it.
yeah, or,
You can do it. In the same way, it's done in Europe.
yeah,
The AMAC gets a file and says, this is the name, and then there are suggestions for all the other 28 countries and the experts. So they do it translate.
Yeah, there are a few files that you could discover inside the code base, and also I point you to them where you can do the same. If you just rename the file with the key pairs at .fr, any one of the ISO language codes, then that would be the localization for that region.
yeah.
They're out of the war file.
If we can share that, Tyler's done a good job on it to make it, hopefully, and maybe we should.
It hasn't been completely validated. I began to validate it with French and which using Google Translate, which I'm sure made absolutely no sense as soon as it was done.
For demonstration purpose, you can take a module, for example, a chemical one or just some categories, and just have translate to see the multilinguality aspect. French, Italian.
Interesting one tried was like I went to Chinese and I just translated the word home and for the button, of course. And our Chinese colleague says, "Why does it say house up in the corner?"
The things that are going to be needed here, especially to get into the true global situation, is that you're going to want to be able to have names that track to other systems, the codes and things like that.
Sure.
Want the identification of the source of those things, like country, but also the system. So the name should have some sort of source characteristics to it.
There's two things to that. There's codes that are like code systems. There's a really specific thing. There's a mechanism to do that. You could register a code system. Code system has some detailed information on that. Then that's one area. The other one for names, if it's an official one, we handle those based on certain official organizations. You can say information about that. But it's just something that comes from another place. Their ability to add references to anything. So you could just say systematically, this is a citation of where this information came from. Now to say something completely systematic about it that exactly place X does in place Y at time, whatever. That right now would just be a business rule, but I think it's a valid point. That any internal system that probably should be
And just to be clear, names really aren't translations. They're just what's being called in another language right now. We're not actually doing translation at the names for other things, so like viscosity. Like the translation for what's viscosity in French, what's melting point in French, or things like that. But the names, and again, the people maybe our INN names translations probably. Our purposes, if we say something's a foreign language, it's just another name in that language. It's not necessarily, we'll have English names, and you won't be able to necessarily pick out which one was
Mall is not, or the event acetaminophen is not an English translation for paracetamol.
Yeah.
To get into what it is that two things are translations for each other, that's sort of a philosophical question, more than anything else, I think. So,
Yeah.
These names, and so these names have languages are contributing to this language.
Yeah. Okay, so we do want translations for what is the term name, or what's the,
Are people gonna wanna know, connect with, say, the language or the country or something like that? And that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's what we have. We have what jurisdiction is the official name, if it's an official name. But if it's a non-official name, it's there for more like mapping purposes, right?
Yeah, but I think that you try to get
Sure.
global, but you're gonna need that kind of.
Right. No, we will, because in other countries, they.
Out of curiosity, so you're saying that you'd find that certain jurisdictions and like naming authorities might be even outside of, it might be not an unofficial name. So unofficial names, would that be the case? Or official names you're considering?
Well,
Yeah.
that's what you're gonna call official.
Well, brand names, for instance, Martindale says.
Someone wearing a uniform said it was okay.
Well, so there's two things coming up, and one is what language differences, and should be identified somehow, so that somebody could say, I actually see what this translation is in French, and it identifies that in French. So there's, it's not seeing everything in English or seeing everything in French, that you have the capability to see things in the different, in other.
So let me make we've kind of conflated two things, I think, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding you. Is the difference between seeing, of course, what is displayed on the screen in different languages, and what the data is displayed.
Right, I'm talking about the data more so than.
Then I think you talk about on the screen. So right now, that for names does hold languages. So I think we've shown that you can specify every name, what language the name to. And it can have multiple languages, right? But a particular name has a particular translation, a particular other language, we believe to be something of a philosophical question of, is name really the same as this other name just translated? Like, paracetamol is not, like I mentioned, is not the translation to acetaminophen, right? Just a synonym that happens to be in another domain, in another jurisdiction.
Part of what I'm saying is you're going to need to have those synonyms and aliases, if you will, and things like that. You need to be able to trace them back to where they relate to, and be able to filter and search them.
Oh yes, absolutely. So right now I think you can do those things. What I don't think you could do is say there's a particular relationship between two arbitrary names. Other than to say that they're part of the same synonymy group. You can't say is that this name that is synonymous with this is further also a translation of this. That's sort of implied, but it's not actually explicit. If you can give us a use case where you think it's especially useful, we can see if there's a business practice that would make that work.
But it was even ISO. We just thought it would be, because even, like Belgium and France, it's French, and they make slight differences in the name of the drug, or certainly the name of the dosage, and things like that. And so we said, well, it will be up to that jurisdiction to maintain that vocabulary. But, for our control vocabulary, we'd like to be able to, have different languages in it. Like that. Like we should have, but it just, we couldn't do that. Yeah.
Translation so much as other, I think aliases and synonyms, I think, are more what I'm
We have them, and you can have them in different languages.
But I guess the question is, do you have it traceable back to a source?
We have it traceable to source, but it's not necessarily, like, we find something in Martindale, or we find something in and even though it's not the official name, we capture all those terms.
So
everything is traced back to source.
Can you find it based upon that source? And I guess that's part of my question. Can you see on the screen?
That's with the document capture. Right now, you just have
so it's right.
Yeah,
you have to open the document up, and you have to
have like a web page
document.
transfer, capture, because again, web pages come and go. And
so I think if you look at the detailed JSON, you see that most of it is fielded fairly well. Some of the tools on the screen are very just preliminary, but the ability to filter on this, if you just looked at the data, you could see it'd be very possible to do. So each source, the source type, the annoying part we've gone through when we've actually had to say what the source type was. That list could be long as long as you've always chosen the same. You always choose the same source. So that this is an I got this from INN, or I got this from Joe, substance name, or so on. All that should be fairly collapsible.
Localization file in the world. If you send me,
I'll send you an email with the path to it. Yeah, path to it. And maybe it doesn't. The default French one that I started with doesn't actually. Yeah, that'll be tough. Usually, you know what? I think it might be pre-compiled, but it's there, and then it compiles afterwards. You're right. I apologize.
then when you give
But I guess you'll be able to see it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Was there anything we missed that we should have questioned?
It's Andrew Marr here. Can you hear me okay? Well, thanks very much for all of the effort that you've put in. I've got a sort of question. There are various points at which you've mentioned, particularly in the past couple of hours, about additional pieces of information to capture. Clearly outside of the standard. I think that there are two aspects there. One, should the standard catch up and include that and go beyond what it said? But more importantly, is around the ability to change information, and therefore needing to be in a message. Go to what Paolo was saying earlier today about if they've got a different system. Then it's all about the messaging and being able to exchange information, etc. And if it's not in a model somewhere, where do you get the message from to be able to do that? And I think that needs to be looked at.
Right. Things we're handling now in relationships are in the standard. So some of the stuff we can make in relationships, if we go further than that, that somewhere, whether go other the temperature of ISO or other thing. But again, we would definitely publish the format. You're right. It wouldn't be if we start capturing metabolites or metabolism. That wasn't part of the standard, and we would that's just data you could link to what's in the standard.
Goes back to what is the information that exchanged. Then you end up if the EA system only contains that information that is the core set that's part of the standard, and yours contains more, then industry has a concern that there will be multiple places in which to provide information in different levels of detail, perhaps to different methods. All of this is going to add a level of complexity to the management of the information. It also goes back to some of the concerns about the ability to exchange the information and follow this existing information that's there in the database. Is that going to be available to start off their set of information? Because if we have to go and provide all of this information separately because they've got a different system, then I think it's all going to get very expensive and very costly. And I think that Paolo isn't in a position to say yes or no. But the consequences of some of the debates that you're having about independence also relates to the ability to share information and be one point of submission of the information about the continual reuse of information that's already there.
Points, Andrew, when, again, but we, if you don't, maybe like Thomas said, a monster message, but it wouldn't be the monster message with the whole product. But again, if we transfer information and EMA decides not to, you can do that. And the migration tools will have in, to get a good substance, there's a certain core information you'd have to submit. If you did additional information, and we already had it fielded in the system, we could accept it. If we don't, we won't. And they a lot of it has to do with the migration tool that we have. And if the fields are there and they're populated and they're in the standard or in the system, we'll take them. But there's no need to take them all if you don't want them. And that, you would control.
If I may, Paolo is here. If I may add something else. So we need to understand that we all depart from the minimum data elements that are defined in the technical specification for the identification of an ID. Okay, that is the minimum core set. On top of that, each region may apply additional data elements. Because as you know, FDA and EMA, for example, or Japan, have different regulations. They need different data in addition to the core set. So there will be some difference. But there is quite a commitment both from FDA and the EMA, for example, trying to harmonize as much as possible in order to minimize the burden on the industry. Something that we are working quite hard, and we have bilateral agreement with the FDA, and we have intensive discussion with all the member states in Europe throughout the European Network Data Board at the moment. And as I said, we're going to implement the ISO IDMP task force that will be of all the European industry, member states, and also will have liaison with FDA. FDA also the IDEX forum that is implemented at the moment, where we are going to discuss that. So the infrastructure is there to manage the burden. It is a huge way forward. Investment to be done for the benefit.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at too. I mean, we're committed. We'll give them any data that is public and they want and that we can share with them. Yeah. We will, but we do have different restrictions than maybe they has, and we can't do everything. But most of that data wouldn't apply to authorized marketed products. I mean, most of that we can.
Yeah.
And in your own instance, behind your own firewall, additional data you keep for the substance. You can say, okay, let us make an agreement, harmonization, what is in the standard, and that we can exchange and we take. That is difficult enough to go forward. And just like Paolo said, on top of that, you have the ability to store, let's say, Spectra and so on.
Yeah. And again, we go up to group 3 permanent or these other levels. Yeah. Like group 3 will mostly be pharmacopoeial data, and we would hope, we're partnering, we're talking with USP, and hope we would, maintain whatever, the specifications that we have, the substances and perhaps even products, that they would maintain that for our database, and we wouldn't be responsible for that, because we don't have, with Kew Gardens, we deal with them that they will, help maintain the herbal terminology, because, Frank's wife is a botanist, but he probably doesn't want to burden her all the time. To validate
you have to separate.
I don't know how to do that. Yeah.
Separate the information, what is really needed.
Yeah.
You get the identifiers on all levels.
Right, that's right.
And the other thing is that you want to keep data which proves like a weight or something else, and or in polymorphic form, and because you have the data, you keep it in your file for yourself.
And some things in the ISO thing we weren't explicit, like for group 2 would Herman mentioned, whether, you know, we said we're going to capture manufacturing information, and do we capture the site of manufacture? That was something that never settled, really, and so have to settle that, you know, and, or that would be a group 4 element, which will be implemented later and stuff like that. So that, you know, that's something that we'll have to settle, and, you know, when we identify sites, do we just use GINAS? Do we make ego duns to get, you know, something, or, you know, there's
not too much field.
yeah, you know, how do we identify sites, and, you know, that's the sort of thing that we'll address, as we go along. You know.
I think you're going to have where this information is coming from.
Right.
Especially if you've got different systems. And to exchange the information between them.
Right. Well, what we would anticipate is that, and again, we would anticipate, like SPL, the manufacturers are responsible for the SPL that's submitted. Okay.
If you're going to share data between the FDA and EMA, that needs to be identified.
Yeah, but that's, you know, generally, you know, for registering a site, I mean, you know, manufacturers would be responsible for maintaining that's the actual site or something, and you know.
So that the EMA, the information, and the FDA being given that information, how we, if there's some difference between those two, where that, you know, who to find out where that is, you go back to the company, or
This is why we needed to implement, to design the business process and the data process.
Yes.
We had the data, as I said yesterday or before, remember. But, for example, way out is whenever you need to send a piece of information, you need to send both to EMEA and to the FDA.
If you send information to both places,
then that takes
it should be okay. But, you know, there's been a lot of things that haven't been standardized. If you look at company names, you know, just who, you know, I mean, how many Friends of Lily do you have? You know, with and with lie, with, you know, there's a lot of different names, and, you know.
How do you correct them?
Yeah, how do you merge them together? And that's why the FDA went to DUNS to kind of try to bring everything together. But, you know, yeah. But there's things that have to be resolved, and, you know, with industry participation, we don't have, it's really like we did through ICH, but, you know, ISO, there's the ability to participate full, you know, regulatory agencies.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing, but from an industry perspective, there is no rough for how this is going to come together yet, and I think it needs to be there. There is a concern that you know, information will have to be provided in different ways to different people at different times, and maybe that's justifiable. But how can we minimize that and make sure that that information that is reused as much as possible? And is there a forum for this to occur? You know, ICH isn't involved directly. ISO doesn't really have any formal representation of industry bodies as distinct from national member bodies. This is, I think today, you know, it focuses on, at the moment, not upon process. And there needs to be some forum in which that can occur, so we can make sure that we have efficient processes, whether it's agency to agency exchange of information, whether it's to agency or to other parties. Is it going to work from a point of view? And I'm not seeing that as really on the agenda effectively.
Andrew, we all agree on that, but I think the long and to approach the next step in a fair way, so we not go and resolve the whole problem in a moment. Let's try to solve EU, let's try to solve FDA, let's try to solve maybe Japan, and after little by little we add additional thoughts. I understand that we need to go global, but sometimes it is better to focus on our work explore it, because otherwise the scenario are too many possible, because it became almost a theory of chaos to harmonize. It will not be
I'm not suggesting.
Sorry, Andrew. To reply to your question about the forum, what I can say is that we may take an action, maybe join FDA and EMEA, to explore possibility to have a forum where we discuss more globally. We further discuss this one in the context of ISO/GMP task force that we are going to implement. Opinion of the other European industry, Pharmaceutical Industry Association, what is their view. And also we are going to discuss that one in the context of the European Regulatory Board and in the bilateral FDA-EU, with their view as well.
Yeah, important, Paolo. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't break it down into small pieces, but it's having that bigger picture of where it needs to go to. And I think it's important that, you know, that there are these bilateral, whatever discussions that take place, and it isn't just EU sitting by itself, and it isn't just USA sitting by itself and doing things. There has to be some interface between the two key points. So I hear what you say. That's positive, but likely it happen.
Now, to decide it. I think that is a platform we have to address our heads of agencies. And to start with. We can make
Absolutely.
we have to decide our heads of agencies.
I don't have anything to add or discuss.
I must say, I'd like to make it a big for what you have done and for those 3 days of information. And I think we can end this session here.
Thank you. Tim and James for putting up with us. We were rationality.
Great. I suppose we'll close out the meeting. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate all the interest, and we'll stay in touch.